This is Anita. I'm going to be showing you today something I hope you'll enjoy, working with Arteza sketchbook and their colored pencils. So let's get started. Today we're going to draw from life some shells. Shells are a great subject because their colors are usually combinations of things. If there's purple and blue in one place, there'll probably be purple and blue in another place. And for colored pencils, they're ideal because they're very soft blends of color. Sometimes they have quite a bit of pattern, and they're just fun to draw. So I have with me 3 interesting shapes, and we're going to get started. So one of the things that's very helpful in drawing is to look for a highlight. You can see on these shapes, because they have some shine, that the highlights are visible. You can see it. When you're drawing from life, it's helpful to have not too many different kinds of lights all over the place. It's helpful to have directed light. That's why a lot of people paint out of doors, because the sun is a single light source. So if you have the opportunity to draw or paint out of doors, it would be a good thing to try. The other thing about multiple light sources is you can see from the shadows here that there are a number of different lights on this because of the way the shadows are going. So that's why sometimes you want to make up the direction of light in your mind and decide and try to keep it consistent. So with these objects that I'm looking at now, I'm thinking that the light is coming like that. And that's going to influence how I draw them. Okay. All these shells, this particular type of shell, which is really, they're all sort of snails, this particular type. A clam is not a snail because it has 2 parts that go together, but a snail only has 1 part. So whether it's an olive shell or a snail or a conch, they're all one type of shell. And you can see that they go around and get progressively smaller as they are coming out of the growth of the organism that lives in there, the little snail animal. So one of the interesting things about drawing this kind of shell is that you want to keep in mind that this shape is progressively getting bigger. It's getting bigger. If it's this, or it's that, or that, it's getting bigger. So even if you're doing it from the side, like this is, say, you want to make sure that the top is following that kind of a structure. So with that in mind, I'm going to set them up in some way that I can see them. So I'm going to start here with the middle one. I'll line up my pencil, and I'm going to draw that in. And then here's halfway over, half as much as the width of the shell. And then I'm going to put the other one in. Remember that this shape is getting progressively smaller as it goes into the center. This one, you have this swirly kind of thing because that's where the water goes into the shell. And then you have the lip of the shell, like that. Now this one over here is, you can see it's up a little bit from that, so you can make it a little taller up there and put that in. Bring this down. Again, it's very helpful if you can find a highlight on the shell to make it look more 3D. Okay, so I'm going to start with the inside of the first shell here, right in there. It's kind of dark, but I'm going to put a little warmth next to it, like that. And then when I put the darker color inside, I'm going to use like a bluish color, see if that takes it back into the distance. That little bit of warmth there is going to make it seem to come forward. The little bit of warmth on the edge of the shape. So what I'm really doing here is creating something like this. Where most of the shape is one color, but as it gets closer to the part that's coming forward, it looks warmer. Things that are warm tend to advance, and things that are cool tend to recede or go back in the distance. Okay, now we're at the part here where there's a highlight, so I want to draw that in right there, so I don't fill that in, and then I'll start coloring it next to that. So that seems to be coming forward. Here, these lines, each one of them has a highlight. The highlight is actually here. So you can draw with a lighter value that shape, but when you get to the highlight, you're going to want to leave it out. Like that. You can get pretty good coverage with these. I think sometimes people can scrape them too. Let's see if that works here. Yeah, you can scrape it out a little bit if you've got too much coverage. Sometimes you're able to do that. Okay. Now the pattern that goes over this is sort of like a dark brown, but the pattern that goes over the highlight that goes over the whole shell is kind of like that. So if you're drawing the pattern in here, you can draw the pattern in, but when you get to the highlight, you have to stop with it. So say that was the pattern of the shell. When you hit that highlight, it's not going to be the color. Everything disappears in a highlight. There's nothing there. So really, you could draw the whole thing in like this first, except there is a highlight up there. Leave out your highlight, and then just start developing your pattern over it, like that. And you can see how when you don't go through the highlight, it does give it a lot of volume. You can do something like that. And another thing that will give it volume is a shadow. So we talked about the direction of light. This would be your direction of light. So if that's your direction of light, the shadow is always going to be perpendicular to it. So if this is your highlight here, then the shadow is going to be going the other way. So if you can think about it, it would sort of go like that. That would be your shadow right there. It's darkest next to the object. And this is also dark in there because it's in the shadow. Okay, so there's one shell. Now I stopped it here because the other shell is starting there. So we'll put some of that in. First, let's draw the highlight in like that. That'll be your highlight. And then this will be the light color of the shell, which is also this kind of peachy color. And then let's see, come down here, go over. This one also has an inner part, like we were talking about, make this part warm, so it seems to come forward. I'm still looking for highlights in this shell to help me figure out how it's structured. Like that. Okay, and here's the lip of the shell, right here. So that part in there would be dark. There's a little bit of a highlight here too. And let's see. So here's that pattern of it going around, that multiple going around like we had talked about. Getting smaller as it goes around. You can sort of rough in the general shape and then just kind of draw around it. The surface of the shell is going to break the highlight into something a little more irregular. So it's really there as a reference point for you. Okay, that's that. Let's see, make that get darker. I think I'm going to go with a darker gray on that one to get it to be darker in there. And then go over it with this orange. Some of that over here too. And then the shadow on that would be, again, is this the same color? I guess so. No, it's this probably. No, that's not it either. Looking for shadow areas to bring this out. And then we have this one over here. Okay, so on this one, again, we're going to look for the highlights. They would be here, and here, and here, and here. So if I were to take this whole shape and shade it in and only leave out the highlights, it would still have depth. That's how important the highlights actually are. So I'm going to draw the whole shape in what's called a local color. That means just the color that the object actually is before you start shading it or doing anything with it. I'm just filling it with color now, just to get something on there. Okay, now I can go back over it and start adding some details. So let's start right here. And this kind of thing comes out like this, almost as if it's woven or something. It has these lines coming out like that. And they'll be coming out like that. As you're going around it, when you realize that the light is coming this way, you may want to change the color of that shading to a different color when it's away from the light. It starts to give it a sort of an iridescent sheen, and you can get back into it with darker color. Looking for a nice dark brown here. And then again, the shadow. Shadow is grazing it right there and here, so that would be where your shadow would come from, like that. So getting a good combination of shadow and highlight can really add a lot to your pencil drawing. Just gives it a sense of being in a place, a sense of positioning. Darkest next to the object. Some people call that a cutting line, cutting dark, like that. Okay, so as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, there isn't really any super dark value in here, and that would really add a lot. So I'm going to go back in and figure out where I could put some dark value to make this really pop. And that's what I'm going to do right now. This is one of those media where white isn't given to you, so you have to think about preserving the paper for your white as much as you can. But just because you don't want to fill in all the white doesn't mean that you want your drawing to look weak. So you've got to have some value contrast in there. And if you've layered the colors, and there's colors underneath your other colors, then it's more interesting than just a plain black. Okay. So I hope you'll find yourself some shells and go out and play with them and look at them and enjoy them. And thank you very much for being here with us today, and we will talk to you soon.